One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table. And a woman in the city, who was a sinner, having learned that he was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to bathe his feet with her tears and to dry them with her hair. Then she continued kissing his feet and anointing them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what kind of a woman this is who is touching him, that she is a sinner." Jesus spoke up and said, "Simon, I have something to say to you." "Teacher," he replied, "speak." A certain creditor had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debts for both of them. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon answered, "I suppose the one for whom he canceled the greater debt." And Jesus said to him, "You have judged rightly." Then turning towards the woman, he said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. Hence she has shown great love. But the one to whom little is forgiven loves little." Then he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." But those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." This is the word of the Lord.
Today's text is a snapshot of an awkward incident at a dinner party. Several have gathered at the home of a respected man who is known for his devout nature. Identified only as Simon the Pharisee, he is hosting a dinner party for a handful of his guests. And he wants to add a little zing to this affair, so he's invited a special guest. A controversial rabbi, none other than you know who. We are curious to know why Jesus has been invited. Perhaps Simon has heard all the buzz that Jesus has spawned, and he wants to have a close encounter. Or perhaps he's caught wind of some of Jesus' radical teachings, and he wants to confront him, perhaps even embarrass him in front of an audience. Whatever the reason, the evening fails to unfold as the host would have desired. Now, before taking a closer look, we need to deconstruct one of our preconceived notions. Christians have become accustomed to hearing the word Pharisee and immediately slapping on the synonym hypocrite. That's not how the original audience would have heard this. When Luke says this man is a Pharisee, He is signaling that this is a very devout man, someone with impeccable moral standards. He is, as the Boy Scout oath says, mentally awake and morally straight. Simon adheres to every scrupulous detail of all 613 laws in the Torah. You shall not kill, steal, commit adultery, or covet. Check. Have no other gods. Keep the Sabbath holy. Honor your father and mother. Check. He not only obeys the law, but is such a stellar example of keeping it that he welcomes being on display for others. I imagine that when he walks through the village, some of the other mothers would grab their sons and drag them over to him and say, "See this fine man? Grow up to be like this." So the highly esteemed Simon is entertaining guests in his home. And with Jesus at the table, expectations are running high. Yet the evening turns even more intriguing when a woman of the city, described as a sinner, appears. She has learned that Jesus is dining at Simon's house, and so she shows up with a jar, an alabaster jar of fine ointment. Now, in our day, it would be very strange for an uninvited guest to suddenly show up at a dinner party. But in first century Palestine, the host oftentimes left his doors wide open, and sometimes beggars and other curiosity seekers might wander in. Now, this woman is not a complete unknown because her sin is public knowledge. The implication is that she is a harlot. She represents the person whose sin is obvious, the mayor whose infidelity has been splashed across the front page of the paper, or the high school principal who has racked up 3 DUIs. There's no need to name the person's sin. Everybody knows it. Now, it's readily apparent that we have two people who represent the opposite ends of the moral spectrum. On one end, we have Simon the saint. On the other end, Charlotte the harlot. Now, if you do not know the Jesus story very well, you might expect him to point to Simon and say, "This is an example for you to follow," and then point to her and say, "This is not." However, if you're familiar with Jesus, you're not surprised to find him tossing out convention and giving expectations a novel twist. As the story unfolds, we discover that Simon is a perfect fit for Mark Twain's clever snippet about people with moral character. He is a good man in the worst sense of the word. Simon is overly impressed with his personal credentials. He's blind to his own shortcomings, and he is harsh in his judgment of others. The story is brief, but includes just enough details to make its point. Once all the guests are at the table, the woman with the jar of ointment appears. At the sight of Jesus, her tears flow. They are a mixture of sorrow and joy. Sorrow for her behavior, joy for Jesus' forgiveness. Now, his feet would have been dirty from walking the dusty roads of Palestine. So she uses her tears to rinse his feet. The elation she feels is so overwhelming that she cannot contain her emotions. She bathes his feet with her tears. Then she wipes his feet with her hair, something I cannot do. She kisses his feet. She anoints them with ointment. The spectacle is just too much for Simon. He points his finger at Jesus and says, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman this is. She is a sinner. Now, I think it would have been wonderful at this point if she would have approached the Pharisee with her jar of ointment. Can't you see Simon trying to back up, horrified and falling backwards out of his chair? Simon's chief concern is his reputation. He wants to make it clear that he does not hang out with women of her ilk, but he overdoes it. He publicly shames her, and he is poised to cast her out of his house when Jesus speaks. He tells a mini parable. A certain creditor had 2 debtors. One owed him 500 denarii, and the other owed him 50 denarii. Neither could pay their debt, and so the creditor pardons their debt, cancels it. Now, which of them will love him more? Beginning to see where this is going, Simon stutters, I suppose he will forgive, and the one who has the greater debt canceled is the one who will love him more. Jesus says, you've judged rightly. Then turning to the woman, he says to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water to wash my feet, but she has washed my feet with her tears. You gave me no kiss, but since she arrived, all she's been doing is kissing my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, yet she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. And that's why she has shown such great love. But the one to whom little is forgiven loves little. Simon's natural response to sin is to chastise. Jesus' natural response to sin is to forgive. Simon wants to punish. Jesus wants to transform. The woman is all too familiar with her sin. A mountain of guilt is crushing her. That's why she cannot stop crying in the presence of Jesus. She takes to heart his forgiveness. And in her liberation from her past, she pours out her love for him. Simon is aghast at her behavior because he is blind to his own sin. He does not understand this effusive praise of the woman because he fails to recognize his own need for forgiveness. However, Jesus does not allow Simon to remain oblivious. Jesus points out that the woman has shown him great hospitality, but Simon, the host, has treated him rudely. Jesus makes it clear to everyone who's at the dinner that you can keep every one of those laws and still treat others with disdain. Simon is fond of pointing out the sinfulness in others. Why? Because he hopes to puff up his own stock by making a comparison. All of us know people whose primary way of conversing is to criticize others. We probably know several people like that. For them, biting comments about someone else is as routine as talking about the Phillies. Sadly, most people who carp about others have no idea that they're constantly making these derogatory comments. That's become their default position. If you secretly taped their conversation and played it back to them, I'm sure they would be horrified. This portrait of Simon that Luke paints for us prompts us to take a close look at ourselves and to consider whether our comments about others are disparaging or uplifting. Next time you catch yourself making a snide remark about someone, just stop and ask yourself, why? How are you benefiting from cutting down someone else? A piece of this story is a reminder that none of us is perfect. All of us fall short of the ideal. However, that is not its central thrust. At its core, this is a story of forgiveness and second chances. It's about recognizing where we fall short so that we can embrace God's love for us and then respond in new and beautiful ways. Simon represents the human urge to condemn. He's honed his ability to highlight the failure of others. Yet while Simon rushes to judgment, Jesus is slow to condemn and quick to forgive. Jesus peers beneath the surface into a person's inner being and sees a greater potential than we often see within ourselves. Words are powerful. Judgmental words can be devastating. Routinely tell a person that she will never amount to anything and she will probably just keep screwing up. Tell someone that he doesn't measure up. Tell him that enough times and he will fulfill that prophecy. However, condemning words are not the only words that exert influence. Words of forgiveness can carry great force. Generous words of affirmation boost someone's confidence and unleash hidden potential. Jesus' pardon and affirmation of the woman is reflected in Les Miserables, when Jean Valjean, recently released from prison, steals the silver forks and spoons from the priest who's given him food and shelter. The police capture Valjean, they drag him back to the priest, and they're waiting for the priest to make his charges against him. But the priest turns the tables when he says, "But I gave you the candlesticks too. You were supposed to take them. They're worth 200 francs. You were supposed to take them along with the forks and spoons." This incredible act of grace transforms Valjean's life. Words of kindness rather than condemnation unleash the potential within him to live a life of honor. For the remainder of his life, his words and actions are motivated by a grateful heart. Having been touched by grace, he treats others with a generous spirit. A friend remembers a time in his childhood when his father said something very powerful that made an impact on him that he's never forgotten. Their family owned a cottage on a lake in Iowa, and every summer the family would spend their vacations at that little cabin. One day the whole family is sitting around the table and they're talking, and he is sitting directly across from his father. Something came up in the conversation over which he and his father disagreed. Now, that was back in the days when disagreements between parents and children were not negotiated, they were settled by parent decree. He said something to his dad, And his father responded, "Well, if you believe that, you'll be a failure." The cottage suddenly became very silent. He shot back to his dad, "Then I'll just be a failure." Nobody moved. The atmosphere was so tense, the boy expected the earth to open up and swallow him whole. He was looking directly at his father, and he noticed his dad's eyes very quickly soften. Looking at his son, the father said, "No, you won't. You won't be a failure." The whole cottage breathed a sigh of relief. And if you ask my friend what happened between the two of them at that moment, he can't really put it into words. But he knew that in that instant, his father had given him a great gift. A gift that he has drawn upon many times over the years. With those words, "No, you won't be a failure," his dad swept away his youthful impetuousness and pride, swept away his anger, swept it all away, because his father saw something deeper and better within him. Not only did he see it, but he lifted it up for everybody to see. That's similar to what Jesus did with this woman in the passage. He saw beyond her failings to her potentials. Potentials that this woman had not yet claimed. Can you remember a time in your life when someone made a very generous evaluation of you? Can you recall a time in your life when you were not at your best and someone purposely peered beyond your shortcomings and highlighted your gifts? Such a moment provides an urge, a powerful urge, to live into your strengths and to develop every potential. What would happen if all of us made it our intention to lift up and to point out the potential in each other? I wonder what would happen.